Have you ever wondered why something that once felt perfectly natural, private, and even healthy suddenly starts causing problems after 60? Most men never question it. They simply assume age is stealing their strength, their stamina, their confidence. But what if the real issue isn't age at all? What if the habits you repeat in silence, habits you formed decades ago, are now slowly working against your hormones, your nerves, your prostate, and your performance? This isn't about shame. It's about understanding the truth no one ever told older men, but every man desperately needs to hear. Have you ever wondered why something that once felt harmless, natural, and even stress-relieving can start causing unexpected problems as you get older? In the style of Dr. Sanjay Gupta, let's dive into a topic many men avoid but absolutely need to understand. Because after 60, your body is playing by new rules, and ignoring those rules can quietly drain your energy, weaken your performance, and even harm your long-term health. The truth is simple. Your hormones shift, your blood vessels change, your nerves become more sensitive, and recovery slows down. Yet many older men keep the same habits they had in their 20s, never realizing how those habits interact with an aging body. And because no one talks about this, your friends don't, your doctor probably doesn't, and society definitely doesn't, men end up suffering alone, thinking something is wrong with them. But nothing is wrong. What's wrong are the habits. One of the biggest mistakes men over 60 make is assuming that stamina, rigidity, and sensation decline simply because of age. Age plays a role, yes, but it's not the whole story. The way you stimulate yourself, the frequency, the pressure, the speed, the mental environment you create. These are all powerful forces that shape male sexual health. Books like The Multi-Orgasmic Man and The Power of Now hint at how awareness, breath, and control can reshape a man's sexual energy, especially in later years. But without guidance, most men repeat unhealthy routines without ever noticing what they're doing to themselves. Another silent mistake is rushing. Many older men turn to quick stimulation to feel a fast release, especially when dealing with stress, boredom, or loneliness. But rushing confuses your nervous system. It trains your body to expect pressure and speed instead of natural arousal, which weakens performance with a partner and can even create numbness. What once felt like a solution becomes a cycle that works against your body. A third mistake is using tight grips or overly intense stimulation. After 60, your blood vessels and nerves demand gentler treatment. Strong pressure can reduce sensitivity over time, something many men don't notice until it's too late. It's not about stopping. It's about adjusting. The body responds better to slower, more mindful touch, the kind that supports blood flow and nerve health rather than overwhelming them. Then there's the mental side. Many older men turn to explicit content more often as physical intimacy becomes complicated, less available, or simply less convenient. But the brain changes with age. Dopamine becomes harder to regulate. Too much visual stimulation can desensitize your natural arousal pathways, making real-life intimacy feel less exciting. What started as entertainment becomes a subtle form of conditioning, one that slowly erodes your confidence without you ever noticing. Another often overlooked factor is frequency. Men over 60 frequently push beyond what their body can comfortably recover from. What felt normal at 30 may now lead to fatigue, prostate irritation, or temporary erectile difficulties. The body is signaling the need for balance. But most men ignore the signs until problems appear. And then comes guilt, a powerful enemy. Many older men feel ashamed or secretive about their self-care, as though desire should fade with age. But desire doesn't fade, it simply evolves. Feeling guilt elevates stress hormones, especially cortisol, which can interfere with testosterone and sexual response. The act is not the problem, the emotional weight surrounding it is. Books like The Body Keeps the Score remind us that the nervous system stores stress and shame in ways that affect every part of a man's health. There is also the danger of ignoring pelvic health. The pelvic floor is a man's sexual foundation. After 60, it naturally weakens unless actively trained. When men stimulate themselves without supporting the pelvic floor through breathing or strengthening exercises, they unknowingly reduce stability, blood flow, and endurance. A strong pelvic floor can restore confidence, firmness, and control, but only if you know how to care for it. Finally, many older men treat sexual wellness as separate from overall health. But circulation, sleep, stress, diet, and movement all shape sexual vitality. You cannot isolate one from the other. The body is a network. Everything affects everything. So the question now is not whether you should stop. It's whether you should evolve. Whether you're willing to shift from habits of urgency to habits of awareness. Whether you're ready to move from force to finesse, from secrecy to understanding, from routine to intentionality. Men who adapt feel younger, stronger, and more connected to their bodies. Men who don't adapt often experience frustration, anxiety, or declining performance that could have been prevented. This speech is not about fear. It's about clarity. It's about giving you the knowledge most men never receive so you can take control of your health in a way that feels confident, natural, and empowered. You are not too old. You are not broken. You simply deserve better information. And once you have it, you can protect your energy, preserve your sensitivity, and improve your overall well-being starting now. Have you ever asked yourself why something that once felt simple, natural, and even healthy starts to feel different, more draining, or less satisfying after the age of 60? It's a question far too many older men avoid, yet it sits quietly in the back of their minds during late nights, early mornings, or moments when the body doesn't respond the way it used to. And the silence around this subject is part of the problem. When men don't talk, they don't learn. And when they don't learn, they keep habits that quietly chip away at their health without them realizing it. The truth is that the male body after 60 is not the same body you had at 30 or 40. Hormones shift, nerves become more sensitive, recovery slows down, and blood flow becomes more precious than ever. But here's the part no one tells you. Your habits must evolve alongside your body. And when they don't, that's when problems begin. It's not age alone that causes declining performance or sensitivity. It's the mismatch between old habits and a new biological reality. That's why many men feel confused, frustrated, or even embarrassed when their body responds differently now. But the body isn't betraying you. It's trying to guide you. Most older men fall into the first silent mistake without even noticing. They try to stimulate themselves with the same intensity, grip, or speed they used decades ago. It feels familiar, it feels efficient, and it feels like the fastest route to release. But with age, nerve endings become more delicate, and blood vessels require gentler handling. When a man forces intensity, he unknowingly trains his body to become dependent on unnatural pressure. Over time, this can reduce natural sensitivity, weaken real-life arousal, and confuse the brain's ability to respond to softer touch. What once felt normal now becomes a source of gradual numbness, making many men think something is wrong with their masculinity, when the real issue lies in overstimulation. Another problem arises from rushing. After 60, many men seek quick relief rather than slow connection. They rush because they feel stressed, lonely, or anxious. They rush because it feels like a way to fill silence, boredom, or emotional emptiness. But rushing teaches the brain to shortcut arousal, bypassing slow buildup and proper blood flow. It sends signals that speed is the only path to satisfaction. This habit creates a performance pattern that shows up later. Difficulty maintaining firmness, difficulty lasting, or feeling disconnected from a partner. It's not about stopping, it's about understanding the nervous system and giving the body time to respond in a way that supports strength rather than drains it. There's also the mental environment men create around this private behavior. Many older men turn to explicit content far more often as they age, not because they are addicted or desperate, but because it feels easy, predictable, and accessible. Yet as the brain ages, dopamine, the chemical that fuels desire and motivation, becomes more sensitive to overstimulation. Explicit content can overpower the natural pathways of arousal. It builds expectations the body cannot meet in real intimacy. The brain becomes more attached to fantasy than reality. And when a real moment arises, the mind doesn't spark with the same intensity. Confidence wavers, performance slips, and self-doubt grows quietly beneath the surface. Books like The Brain That Changes Itself describe how the mind reshapes itself with repeated behaviors, and that includes sexual patterns. A lesser-known mistake also affects older men ignoring recovery. Young bodies bounce back quickly, but after 60, the tissues involved in arousal, especially the prostate, pelvic floor, and vascular system, need more time to reset. Men who ignore this end up irritating their prostate, draining their energy, or noticing temporary difficulties that feel alarming but are entirely preventable. The body speaks in whispers at first, mild discomfort, a slower response, a moment of fatigue. But when these signals are ignored, they become louder over time. And then comes the emotional layer: guilt, secrecy, or a feeling that sexual desire is somehow inappropriate past a certain age. This emotional weight does far more harm than men realize. The body and mind are deeply connected. Guilt elevates stress hormones like cortisol, which suppress testosterone and reduce blood flow. In other words, the shame surrounding the act often harms a man more than the act itself. When you approach yourself with judgment, your body responds with tension. And tension is the enemy of performance. Books such as The Body Keeps the Score remind us that the nervous system doesn't forget emotional pressure. It carries it into every physical response. Another overlooked factor is the pelvic floor. Most men don't think about it at all, yet it is the foundation of male sexual health. After 60, muscles naturally weaken unless they're trained. When stimulation happens without supporting these muscles, the base becomes unstable. Blood flow drops, endurance declines, and confidence follows. But with simple exercises, slow breaths, gentle holds, mindful release, a man can rebuild strength, restore control, and awaken sensitivity that feels younger than his years. Finally, many men treat this aspect of life as something separate from overall health. But circulation, cardiovascular strength, sleep quality, stress levels, diet, hydration, and movement all affect sexual well-being. A man cannot nourish one part of his body without nourishing the whole. When you improve your lifestyle, your sexual health improves automatically. When you ignore your lifestyle, this is often the first area to show signs of decline. The real question today is not whether a man should stop this natural act. The question is whether he is willing to evolve, whether he is willing to replace old habits with wiser ones, whether he can shift from hurried stimulation to mindful intention, whether he can honor the body he has now instead of forcing it to perform like it did decades ago. When a man listens to his body instead of dictating to it, everything begins to improve: confidence, energy, sensitivity, and even emotional peace. You are not too old. You are not losing your masculinity. You are simply being invited to a new phase of male health, one that requires awareness, gentleness, and wisdom. And once you understand the silent mistakes most older men make, you can avoid them, heal from them, and unlock a version of yourself that feels strong, capable, and fully alive. Have you ever noticed how much your mind influences your body, especially after 60? A thought that once passed through your mind without effect can now change your mood, your energy, even your physical performance. And yet, most older men never stop to examine the mental habits that shape their sexual health. They focus on the physical side, the mechanics, the sensations, the outcome. But the body is only half the story. The mind is the silent engine. And when that engine starts to run on stress, fear, comparison, or loneliness, it alters everything without making a sound. One of the most misunderstood changes that happens after 60 is not just in hormone levels or blood flow, it's in emotional patterns. Life becomes heavier for many men. Responsibilities shift. Children grow up. Careers settle or end. The sense of purpose changes. And with that change, many men begin relying on private pleasure as a way to soothe emotional tension. It becomes a quiet escape, something to fill moments of stress, frustration, boredom, or even sadness. But the problem is not the act itself. It is the emotional tension behind it. When pleasure becomes a tool for numbing, the brain rewires itself around avoidance rather than connection. And that creates a cycle of dependency that weakens the very energy men are trying to restore. What many men fail to see is how deeply the nervous system reacts to emotional triggers. The body remembers every stressor, every moment of guilt, every spike of anxiety. When a man engages in intimate self-stimulation while feeling stressed or mentally scattered, his body learns to associate arousal with tension, not relaxation. Over time, this creates performance issues, difficulty staying present, difficulty staying firm, difficulty feeling satisfied. It becomes harder to connect emotionally or physically with a partner because the brain is stuck in a pattern of rushing, escaping, or mentally disconnecting. This is why emotional health plays such a powerful role in sexual well-being. Books like Man's Search for Meaning and Healing the Fragmented Self describe how the mind seeks relief from emotional pressure in ways that can become automatic. Many older men don't realize how automatic their habits have become. They don't ask whether they feel lonely, overwhelmed, or disconnected. They simply follow the routine and hope it brings relief. But afterward, they often feel emptier rather than fulfilled because the act didn't address the emotional root. It only paused it for a moment. Another silent issue is comparison. Many older men judge themselves by how they performed 20 or 30 years ago. They compare their current stamina, speed, firmness, or desire to a younger version of themselves. But comparison drains confidence, and confidence is a core part of sexual energy. When a man feels like he is failing or falling behind his past self, his body responds with tension. The nervous system tightens, the breath shortens, blood flow reduces, performance suffers, and the mind interprets that as another failure, creating a loop that becomes harder to break with age. Instead of comparing yourself to who you were, the real transformation begins when you learn to understand who you are now. The body of a 60-year-old man is not weaker. It is wiser. It needs different rhythms, different pacing, different forms of touch, different mental states. When a man works with his body instead of against it, everything feels smoother. But when he fights his own expectations, everything becomes harder. Another emotional factor older men overlook is the pressure to be discreet, quiet, or secretive. Many men carry decades of internalized beliefs that sexuality should be private, even shameful. That old programming does not disappear at 60. It often becomes heavier. Some men feel embarrassed to talk to their partner about their needs. Others feel guilty for having desire at an older age. Some think their body should have slowed down by now, and therefore something is wrong with them if they still crave pleasure. But desire does not expire with age. It evolves. It seeks deeper connection, slower rhythms, and more mindful presence. Shame does not support that evolution. It suffocates it. Every time a man feels guilt around his own natural impulses, his brain releases stress chemicals that disrupt the hormonal balance that supports healthy sexual function. That is why guilt and performance problems often appear together. It is not the act that causes issues, it is the emotional environment around it. When a man treats himself with judgment, his body responds like it is under attack, and the body cannot open to pleasure when it feels threatened. Another layer many older men ignore is emotional exhaustion. Life after 60 is full of transitions. Retirement, shifting roles within the family, changing social circles, health concerns. When emotional fatigue builds up, the brain becomes less sensitive to natural pleasure. Men begin seeking stronger stimulation, faster patterns, or more intense visual triggers to feel the same satisfaction they once felt naturally. But this pursuit of intensity is a trap. It pushes the brain into a cycle where mild stimulation no longer feels rewarding. So men unknowingly escalate patterns that drain their sensitivity even more. This is why many older men feel frustrated when simple touch no longer generates the same excitement. The issue isn't age, it's overstimulation caused by emotional depletion. Healing begins when a man recognizes the emotional landscape behind his habits, when he slows down long enough to ask himself what he's feeling before he seeks pleasure. Is it stress, boredom, loneliness, anxiety, habit, desire? These questions matter. They give a man control. They bring awareness to a part of life that often runs on autopilot. Books like The Mindful Man highlight how powerful self-awareness becomes as a man ages. Awareness turns something mechanical into something intentional. And intention changes everything. When a man learns to approach his body with calmness, confidence, and emotional clarity, his nervous system relaxes. Blood flow improves. Sensation increases. Pleasure becomes richer. Performance becomes steadier. He begins to feel connected rather than rushed, energized rather than drained, fulfilled rather than empty. Age does not reduce a man's sexual energy. Emotional stress does. Emotional avoidance does. Emotional tension does. But when a man understands his inner world and honors it, he unlocks a strength that feels youthful, grounded, and deeply alive. There's a part of men's health almost no one talks about. Yet it influences every aspect of sexual performance, confidence, and pleasure after the age of 60. It is the foundation of strength in the lower body, the hidden engine behind arousal, control, and stamina. And that foundation is the pelvic floor. Most men go through their entire lives barely aware that this group of muscles even exists, let alone understanding how important it becomes as the body ages. But after 60, the pelvic floor quietly becomes one of the most influential forces in a man's sexual well-being. Think about it. Every erection you've ever had, every moment of firmness, every sensation of fullness, every contraction at the peak of release, all of it depends on a strong, healthy pelvic floor. These muscles work like a hammock supporting the bladder, prostate, and reproductive organs. They regulate blood flow, control pressure, and help maintain stability. Yet most older men neglect them completely. They don't strengthen them. They don't stretch them. They don't breathe in a way that supports them. And slowly, quietly, the foundation weakens. What does that look like in everyday life? It might begin with reduced firmness, slower response time, or difficulty maintaining tension. It might show up as a softer release, a weaker contraction, or a subtle feeling of less sensation. Some men notice urinary dribbling, urgency, or reduced control. Others feel pressure in the lower pelvis or discomfort in the prostate. And almost all think these changes are simply old age. But often it is not age, it is inactivity. The pelvic floor is just like any other muscle. Use it and it grows stronger. Neglect it and it grows weak. After 60, the body naturally loses muscle mass, including the muscles you don't see or think about. And because the pelvic floor is rarely trained on purpose, it's often the first to decline. Yet this decline shows up in ways that feel deeply personal. It affects a man's confidence, identity, and sense of vitality. But the encouraging truth is that these problems are not inevitable. They are preventable and often reversible. One of the biggest mistakes older men make is stimulating themselves without supporting or engaging the pelvic floor. They focus entirely on external sensation while ignoring the internal muscles responsible for blood flow and control. Without engagement, the pelvic floor becomes passive. It receives pressure but doesn't respond. Over time, this leads to weaker contractions during climax, slower recovery, and reduced strength. And because no one teaches men how to use these muscles, they assume the problem lies somewhere else. Another issue is breath. Most men breathe shallowly from the chest instead of deeply from the diaphragm. Shallow breathing tightens the pelvic floor, creating unnecessary tension. The muscles become overworked, stressed, and rigid. Rigid muscles cannot relax fully, and relaxation is essential for proper blood flow. Deep breathing, on the other hand, expands the belly, gently massages internal organs, and increases circulation to the pelvis. It activates a calming response in the nervous system that enhances sensation and allows the pelvic floor to function naturally. But without conscious breathing, many men experience reduced blood flow without understanding why. Another silent factor is posture. After 60, many men develop rounded shoulders, weaker core muscles, and stiffness in the hips. This postural shift places pressure on the lower spine and the pelvic floor. Blood flow becomes compressed. Nerves become irritated. The pelvic floor becomes overstressed, and men begin experiencing subtle symptoms like reduced sensitivity, slower arousal, or discomfort after stimulating themselves. Again, they assume age is the enemy, when in reality, the culprit is posture and immobility. Books like A Headache in the Pelvis and the Multifidus Back Pain Solution explain how deeply the pelvic floor is connected to posture, breath, and emotional tension. These are not isolated systems. They work together. When one weakens, the others compensate. And when too much compensation occurs, the entire system becomes strained. Another mistake older men make is holding tension in the pelvic region throughout the day. This tension might come from stress, long periods of sitting, or unconscious clenching of the abdomen. When these muscles remain tight, they lose flexibility. A tight pelvic floor can feel just as weak as a loose one. It cannot generate strong contractions because it is already contracted. It cannot relax enough to allow blood flow to fill the erectile tissue properly. It becomes a cycle. Tension leads to reduced blood flow leads to weaker performance leads to more emotional stress, and emotional stress creates more tension. Understanding the pelvic floor begins with awareness, not force, not strain. Awareness, becoming conscious of how these muscles feel, learning to relax them, learning to contract them with precision rather than brute force. Gentle engagement, slow breathing, mindful release. These techniques awaken the foundation of male sexual health. Strength builds from softness. Power builds from patience. Control builds from understanding. Another part many men overlook is the connection between the pelvic floor and the prostate. As men age, the prostate naturally becomes more sensitive. Overstimulation, inflammation, or pressure can worsen urinary symptoms and weaken sexual response. But when the pelvic floor is strong and flexible, it supports the prostate rather than compressing it. Many men notice improved urinary control, reduced pressure, and stronger, more satisfying performance simply by awakening these muscles. Even walking plays a role. A strong gait activates the glutes, hips, and core, all of which support pelvic health. But many older men lose their natural stride. They shuffle, they sit more, they tighten their hips. And as mobility decreases, so does pelvic vitality. Movement brings blood flow. Blood flow brings life. Another overlooked factor is recovery. After 60, the pelvic floor needs time to rest. Overuse, long periods of sitting, or repeated daily stimulation without rest can exhaust the muscles. Many men unknowingly fatigue the pelvic floor, then wonder why their performance feels inconsistent. Rest is not weakness. It is strategy. It is how the body rebuilds strength. When a man learns to train, care for, and understand his pelvic floor, something remarkable happens. Sensation increases, blood flow improves, control returns, confidence rises. The body begins to feel alive, responsive, youthful, not because of magic, but because the foundation beneath everything has been rebuilt. A man over 60 does not need to surrender his sexual strength. He needs to learn how to support the muscles that make that strength possible. And once he does, his body responds with gratitude, vitality, and a new sense of power that he may not have felt in years. There is a part of modern life that older men rarely question, yet it profoundly shapes their sexual confidence, desire, and well-being after 60. It slips into the mind quietly, often during moments of boredom, curiosity, or loneliness. It promises quick stimulation, fast excitement, and a distraction from reality. But what many men don't realize is that this mental shortcut can become one of the biggest obstacles to natural intimacy, sensitivity, and arousal as they age. And that shortcut is the overuse of visual stimulation. For younger men, the brain responds quickly, aggressively, and almost automatically to visual triggers. The pathways are fresh, the dopamine system is strong, and the body reacts with youthful intensity. But after 60, the brain changes. The dopamine response becomes more delicate, more sensitive to overstimulation, and less forgiving when it is pushed too hard. Many older men don't feel the change happening. They simply notice they need more stimulation to feel the same excitement. They need more intensity, more novelty, or more speed to spark the same response they once felt naturally. What they don't realize is that this increase in stimulation isn't a sign of higher desire. It's a sign of desensitization. The brain is adapting to the intensity by lowering its natural response, and slowly, quietly, the pathways that once lit up from natural touch, connection, or imagination begin to fade. Men start relying on external triggers instead of internal desire. And that is when problems begin to appear. Many older men unknowingly train their brains to depend on rapid novelty. Visual stimulation provides constant change, new faces, new shapes, new scenarios. But real intimacy is the opposite. It requires presence, patience, and emotional engagement. When the brain gets used to fast, artificial novelty, real life feels slower. It feels like it needs more effort. Some men take this personally, thinking they have lost masculinity or drive. But the truth is simpler. The brain has adjusted to an unrealistic rhythm. Books like The Brain That Changes Itself and Dopamine Nation explain how the brain rewires itself around repeated behaviors. When a behavior becomes the primary source of pleasure or stress relief, the brain adjusts its reward system to match it. And because visual stimulation is designed to be intense, the reward system shifts dramatically. This shift can reduce sensitivity, lower natural arousal, and even affect emotional connection. Another issue many older men face is mental fragmentation. When stimulation becomes rushed or frequent, the mind splits. It drifts into fantasy instead of staying present. It jumps between thoughts instead of grounding itself. It becomes dependent on external images instead of internal awareness. This fragmentation affects performance because the brain and body are no longer operating as a unified system. The mind is in one world, the body is in another. And when a split occurs, the nervous system cannot relax enough to support strong arousal. Another silent consequence is emotional numbing. Many men turn to stimulation not out of desire, but out of habit. Late nights, stress relief, boredom, or distraction. But using pleasure to cope with emotional discomfort prevents the mind from processing those emotions. Over time, emotional numbness sets in. Things that once excited or inspired begin to feel flat. Interest fades. Motivation decreases. And because emotional vitality feeds sexual vitality, desire naturally declines. One of the greatest misunderstandings among older men is believing that desire disappears with age. But desire does not vanish. It becomes more selective. It needs emotional energy. It needs presence. It needs a relaxed nervous system and a stimulated mind. Over-reliance on visual triggers strips away this natural energy. It creates dependence rather than desire. Another problem older men face is the mismatch between artificial stimulation and physical reality. Visual stimulation is fast, precise, and exaggerated. Real intimacy is slower, softer, and shaped by connection. When the brain becomes conditioned to extreme stimulation, real physical sensations feel dull by comparison. Many men mistakenly believe this means their body is failing, but their body isn't failing. Their brain's overwhelmed. There is also the issue of timing. Many older men indulge when they are tired, stressed, or alone, but the brain associates pleasure with the emotional state it is in. If the act happens during exhaustion, the brain connects intimacy with fatigue. If it happens during loneliness, the brain ties arousal to isolation. Over time, the emotional pattern becomes stronger than the physical one. This is why some men feel disconnected during real intimacy. They have unintentionally trained their brains to associate arousal with solitude. Another subtle but powerful effect is energy drain. After 60, the body's hormonal balance becomes more sensitive. Excessive stimulation or high-frequency release can temporarily reduce testosterone levels, increase fatigue, and disrupt the body's natural rhythm. Many men mistake this for aging when it's actually hormonal imbalance created by overstimulation. With proper balance, many regain vitality they thought was gone forever. Awareness is the first step. Not judgment, not guilt. Awareness. Becoming conscious of how often, why, and in what emotional state you seek stimulation. Asking yourself whether it is desire, boredom, habit, or escape. This awareness breaks automatic patterns. It gives a man control over his impulses rather than letting impulses control him. When older men reduce reliance on visual triggers and increase reliance on sensation, imagination, breath, and presence, something remarkable happens. Sensitivity returns. Desire increases. Confidence strengthens. The brain becomes more responsive to natural touch and connection. The nervous system relaxes. The emotional body becomes more open. Men begin to feel grounded again, strong again, vibrant again. The mind is the most powerful sexual organ. When it is overstimulated, everything weakens. When it is balanced, everything improves. And that balance is not only possible after 60, it can be life-changing. There's a final mistake many men over 60 make, one they rarely think about because it hides behind the routines of daily life. It doesn't happen in a dramatic moment, and it doesn't cause immediate symptoms. Instead, it builds quietly, subtly, through patterns of exhaustion, nutrition, sleep, circulation, and stress. And the mistake is believing that sexual health exists separately from overall health. Many older men imagine intimate performance as an isolated system, independent from the heart, the brain, the gut, the nervous system, or the lifestyle they maintain. But after 60, nothing about the body operates in isolation. Every organ, every system, every habit, good or bad, feeds into the sexual response. For younger men, the body compensates easily. Late nights, poor food, stress, dehydration, sitting for long hours, irregular sleep, all of it gets absorbed by youth. But as the years pass, the margin for error narrows. The body becomes more sensitive to imbalance and more reactive to lifestyle choices. Blood vessels stiffen, circulation becomes less flexible, hormones become more delicate, and the nervous system requires more rest to maintain clarity and strength. What many men interpret as aging is often just lifestyle wear and tear catching up. Think about circulation. Every form of arousal depends on healthy blood flow. But circulation weakens not because of age alone, but because of inactivity, dehydration, poor nutrition, or chronic stress. Many older men rarely drink enough water, and when they do, they drink it at the wrong times, large amounts too late at night or none throughout the day. They eat heavy meals that spike blood sugar, tighten arteries, and reduce vascular flexibility. They sit for hours without movement, compressing the hips and reducing pelvic blood supply. When blood flow weakens, performance weakens. Not because the man is older, but because his circulatory system is working harder than it should. Sleep is another silent factor. Men after 60 often struggle with inconsistent sleep patterns. Late night phones, irregular routines, nighttime worries, all of these reduce the body's ability to restore testosterone, repair tissues, reset dopamine levels, and calm the nervous system. Without quality sleep, desire decreases, sensitivity decreases, stamina decreases, and emotional regulation becomes harder. Poor sleep creates a cascade of changes that affect intimacy far more than people realize. Books like Why We Sleep highlight how deeply hormones and sexual health depend on restorative rest. When sleep suffers, pleasure suffers. Nutrition is equally powerful. Many older men don't realize how foods high in saturated fats, sugars, or processed ingredients constrict blood vessels and reduce nitric oxide, the molecule responsible for opening blood pathways. When nitric oxide drops, performance drops. When inflammation rises, sensitivity declines. When the gut becomes imbalanced, the brain receives weaker signals of pleasure and motivation. The body is interconnected. What harms one system harms them all. Then there is the emotional side: stress, worry, unprocessed memories, or unresolved conflict. The older a man becomes, the more life he carries behind him: family pressures, financial concerns, regrets, and changes in identity. Stress is not just a feeling. It is a chemical event. It constricts vessels, unbalances hormones, tightens the muscles of the pelvis, drains energy, weakens digestion, and interrupts the brain's natural reward system. When stress rises, desire falls. When stress rises, the nervous system becomes tense, and tension is the enemy of healthy performance. But the most damaging part of this lifestyle mistake is not the physical effects, it's the mindset. Many men believe they must handle everything alone. They endure pain quietly. They ignore discomfort. They don't discuss their worries. They don't share their emotional load. And this internal isolation gradually wears away their vitality. Human beings are not designed to carry everything by themselves. Emotional weight becomes physical weight. Psychological tension becomes biological tension. The nervous system records every unspoken burden. Movement is another essential piece. After 60, many men stop exercising or only do minimal walking. But the pelvic region needs strong legs, strong hips, a flexible spine, and activated glutes to maintain proper blood flow. Movement pumps life into the lower body. It restores circulation. It stimulates hormones. It activates muscles that directly support sexual health. A man who moves daily feels younger than a man who sits daily. It is not age, it is mobility. The body is honest. It will tell you when it's tired, tight, stressed, dehydrated, undernourished, overstimulated, or ignored. But most men mistake these whispers for symptoms of aging. They think, this is just how things are now. But that belief is misleading. Many issues men face after 60 are not permanent. They are reversible. The body responds rapidly when given the right environment: better sleep, better nutrition, better movement, better breath, better stress management, better intention. Another lifestyle factor men overlook is the rhythm of the day. The nervous system thrives on routine. Consistency builds stability. Stability builds confidence. And confidence builds performance. When eating, sleeping, and waking patterns are irregular, the nervous system becomes scattered. A scattered nervous system cannot reliably support desire or stamina. Rhythm grounds the body. It creates predictability, and predictability nurtures hormonal balance. Hydration also plays a huge role. Many older men live in a state of low-level dehydration. This thickens the blood slightly, reduces circulation, tightens muscles, and weakens energy. Proper hydration supports the prostate, bladder, kidneys, and vascular system. Something as simple as sipping water throughout the day can dramatically improve performance over time. Even sunlight matters. Sun exposure regulates hormones, improves mood, boosts vitamin D, increases testosterone, and strengthens the immune system. 10 minutes of morning sunlight can do more for male vitality than expensive supplements. And then there's connection, emotional, intimacy, meaningful conversation, laughter, touch, companionship. Human connection feeds the nervous system with oxytocin, a hormone that reduces stress and increases feelings of comfort. Oxytocin directly supports performance by calming the body, opening vessels, and increasing trust signals within the brain. A man who feels emotionally connected will have better physical responses than a man who feels isolated. When an older man begins to see sexual health not as a separate subject, but as a reflection of his whole lifestyle, everything changes. The body begins to respond in ways that surprise him. Energy returns. Sensitivity awakens. Confidence rises. The nervous system stabilizes. Pleasure becomes deeper, slower, more fulfilling. Strength becomes smoother and more reliable. A man over 60 does not lose his vitality because of age. He loses it when lifestyle habits quietly drain him. But when he supports his body with intention, his body supports him in return. With strength, clarity, and a renewed sense of masculine well-being that feels profoundly alive.